Serbia closes a chapter of its recent history with the arrest of Ratko Mladic, the last major figure of the war in the former Yugoslavia. Just what does this arrest mean for Serbia's future? And could so-called international justice be a deterrent for crimes against humanity? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Hazem Seeker. Welcome to the program. After 16 years on the run, Europe's most wanted man has been arrested. Former Serbian General Ratko Mladic will now be extradited to the UN tribunal in The Hague on charges of genocide and crimes against humanity. We'll be looking too at the political ramifications of Mladic's arrest. Is the door open now to European Union membership for Serbia? First, though, this report from Paul Brennan.
The startled face of Europe's most wanted man in a photograph taken at the very moment of his arrest. Looking lighter and a little frail, it is still unmistakably Ratko Mladic. In Belgrade, where Mladic's extradition proceedings will begin with a court appearance on Friday, his wife and their son Darko arrived with their lawyer but said nothing to reporters as they entered the building. They left shortly afterwards, having apparently been unable to meet him.
This morning we have not met with Ratko Mladic because he's at the moment taking a walk. The family will come to visit him at 11 o'clock. The investigative judge will resume the trial at 12 o'clock. Questioning at 12 o'clock.
That questioning will help decide whether Mladic is actually fit to be sent to The Hague to face trial for genocide. The man himself was glimpsed only briefly on Thursday as he was transferred into custody in Belgrade. But the Belgrade hearing was adjourned because of concerns about his health. It's a far cry from a home video which emerged in 2009 of the general attending his son's wedding 7 years earlier. Footage from a year after that showed him cradling his newborn grandson. Then, in a clip from just 3 years ago, a more elderly Mladic is seen carrying a walking stick, but still laughing and joking in the snow with two women. It seems to confirm the widespread belief that Mladic's popularity in Serbia meant he was able to live openly while still evading international authorities. Indeed, Serb reaction to his arrest is certainly not celebration.
I don't know what to say. It's very sad for Serbia that these things are happening. This isn't a success, but a collapse of the Serbian nation. I think Mladic is a national hero. We should have him sent away in a different manner, not like this.
Some other people on the other side of the war were doing the same things, but they never answered for it. I think Mladic was in charge, but at the end, he could not control the whole situation.
It will be for the war crimes judges to have the final say on Mladic's fate. The extradition proceedings in Belgrade are expected to result in a preliminary decision by Monday. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our guest from Durban, Faisal Dalji, a journalist who covered the war in Croatia, Bosnia and the resulting peace talks in Geneva. And joining us on the line from New York is Mohammad Shakirbi, a former Bosnian foreign minister. He was also ambassador to the UN. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us. Faisal Dalji in Durban, if I could start with you. Now, I guess my first question is, why did Mladic's arrest take this long? We're talking about 16 years here. And are there some perhaps very difficult questions for Serbia to answer about how he managed to evade capture for all this time?
Well, absolutely. I think there has been layers of protection offered to Mladic. Number one, the ultra-nationalists within the military, obviously his friends and family, and elements within the Orthodox Church that provided cover for him. I think he's been able to evade capture for the last 16 years is because these elements offered protection. And as the situation changed within Serbia, the old guard, the old nationalists, either resigned or died, and that protection fell away. So Mladic was left on his own to fend for himself, and the new regime in Serbia, because of various factors, decided to put the squeeze on him. So there are many questions to be asked, especially if you look at the little village in which he was arrested. It has not more than 4,000 people, and I'm quite sure that inhabitants in the village obviously knew that Mladic was living amongst them. So, and he, this support he was able to gather from many people for many years. So politically, as soon as that support eroded, his time was up.
So do you think there is a political will then on the other side to go after those who protected him for so long?
Well, I have my doubts about that, because for the last 16 years, or since the end of the war, the foot soldiers of the Serbian project are still free. They are the ones who carried out the gruesome crimes, and they are now living amongst the victims. So I don't think that there will be a political will to go after them. In fact, the Mladic, Karadzic are just symbols of this project. But the real perpetrators of the crime are still free, and I do not see any political will to go after them.
I want to turn to Mohammed Shakirbi in New York, who joins us on the line on the phone for this. Obviously, you were a former ambassador, former foreign minister rather, in Bosnia. Presumably, there's a lot of positive reaction to this arrest. It was 16 years coming. Does this close, or perhaps do something to close, a very painful chapter in the history of that region?
Well, first of all, I would hope that it would open up a new chapter. Closing the old chapter can't be done as long as Bosnia remains divided as it is. It is defined by really what Ratko Mladic did. The crimes that he will answer for in the Hague Tribunal have not been erased on the ground in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the ethnic cleansing campaign, the murders that he engaged in, are in fact now the basis for maps and politics in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But let me just come back to your previous question. 16 years is a long time, and of course I've lived it. I was there in Dayton, and I was there, of course, with the International Criminal Tribunal when it was formed, and also representing Bosnia before the International Court of Justice. All of these are relevant points as to why Ratko Mladic has remained free. Ratko Mladic was not in hiding from the day he was indicted, which was in the summer of 1995. He actually moved very freely, including through Bosnia after peace was signed, and under the effective protection of NATO and other forces who were supposedly there to implement the peace process. So the notion of impunity of war criminals started way before Ratko Mladic went hiding in Serbia. And for the first 2, maybe 3, maybe even as long as 4 years, Ratko Mladic was living a relatively comfortable and free life, and never under the threat of arrest from the NATO and other forces supposed to implement the peace in Bosnia. Second of all, I think the reason he has not been arrested up to now is because, of course, when he speaks, many others will have to fear. And those are people in Belgrade who would be directly linked to his crimes, but also people in the West, officials in the West, who acquiesced to his campaign of ethnic cleansing, who felt that somehow either he was too powerful to confront, which I think proved to be a myth at the end when NATO did strike him and strike him hard, or those who were maybe sympathetic to the view that Muslims don't belong in Europe. Unfortunately, Ratko Mladic's campaign did much to damage the notion of pluralistic, tolerant, not only Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also Europe.
Faisal Dalji, you want to respond to some of that?
I absolutely agree with the former ambassador. And I think if you look at the peace talks that were taking place in Geneva around about 94, 95, there was a deliberate attempt made to appease Karadzic and Mladic and Milosevic. So the former ambassador is correct in stating that there was immunity and impunity regarding the activities of Mladic. And if you look at the images shown on TV, you could see Mladic operating freely in Serbia, attending football matches, attending weddings, and people knew where he was. So I think his time ran out because politicians needed to move on. And with EU talks on the horizon, Mladic was out on a leg. So I totally agree with what the ambassador has said.
Well, let's talk a little bit more. Sorry to interrupt. Let's talk a little bit more about what can be read into the timing of this arrest, because some diplomats in Europe contend that officials in Belgrade could have arrested Mladic a lot sooner if they wanted to, if they felt that the benefits of reconciling with the West and reconciling with the European Union outweighed the very strong nationalist sentiment that is felt by many Serbs who view Mladic as a hero. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Well, there is a cost-benefit analysis from the perspective of all of those that are involved in this process. I'm aware that there would have been a very damning report presented to the UN Security Council next week by the prosecutor Serge Bremert, which may have at least demanded, if not prompted, that sanctions be considered with respect to Serbia for failing to deliver on its commitments regarding cooperation with the War Crimes Tribunal, particularly the arrest of Ratko Mladic. A lot of people have focused on Serbia being now somehow accepted into the European Union, but I'm also aware of the fact that they may have faced sanctions on the other end. The other side of it is I haven't really seen Ratko Mladic speak yet, but there is evidence that he may be mentally and psychologically damaged after some ill health. So handing him in now, whatever he says and whatever he can say, and even what he can remember, may be somehow diminished either by the appearance or the actual fact of his own diminished mental status. And I have a sneaking suspicion that many people believe that Ratko Mladic is no longer a threat to them, at least as much as he was, sitting in the dock in The Hague.
Faisal Delgi in Durban. Is Europe under pressure now to deliver on its promise to approve EU membership for Serbia, now that Mladic has been arrested, which was a major obstacle in that regard?
Well, I think, yes, there is pressure on the EU to start discussions and accede to Serb membership. But I think for the victims of the Bosnian campaign, I think this is going to have a tremendous effect on them. People have been calling for justice for many, many years. But ultimately, the Serb project is still alive in Bosnia. As Mr. Sacherbey has said, the country has been divided, and the facts on the ground were created by Mladic. So thousands of people have been ethnically cleansed from their homes, from their lands, and they have no recourse. So justice in The Hague has a hollow term for these people who are the victims. And I think with Serb membership to the EU, it doesn't alter the fact that Bosnians are still the victims of this man's crimes. Whether it's the siege of Sarajevo, whether the concentration camps in Gorazde, or what happened in Srebrenica. The facts on the ground are very clear. There is no recompensation. There is no comfort for these individuals. Mladic is a symbol, and if the EU is prepared to conditionally guarantee Serb membership on the arrest of Mladic, then the thousands of other foot soldiers are sitting by, happily drinking and eating.
Mohammed Shakirbi in New York, is there a danger that there could be some sort of a Serbian nationalist backlash if the country's demands for EU membership and wanting to reconcile with the West are not met at some point in the future?
Well, first of all, let me say that Serbian membership and other membership in the EU and the region is most welcome, but it would be indeed ironic if Serbia becomes a member of the EU before Bosnia and Herzegovina does, when they've handed over the war criminal that was perpetrating all of these horrendous acts in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that's their reward, while Bosnia continues to suffer because of the consequences of those war crimes. I also would like to highlight maybe a bit of hypocrisy here. I'm an American, and certainly a person from the West, but I feel that American and European officials who frequently hold up Bosnia as a place where they have helped the Muslim people is a complete sham. The Muslim people of Bosnia and Herzegovina continue to suffer. The broader society of all Bosniaks and Croats and Serbs who believe in a multi-ethnic Bosnia is going to continue to suffer. And they continue to suffer because of what was done 16 years ago, and they continue to suffer because of the prejudices still held against Muslim people in Bosnia and Herzegovina today. I was the person who signed the Dayton Accords as foreign minister. It was the proudest day of my life, and it was one of the saddest and most shameful days of my life. I was proud because I put an end to war and an end to fighting. But I also knew then that I was putting Bosnia in peril and in the hands of the West to hopefully bring us through to a real peace and to integration into Euro-Atlantic institutions. We ended the war, but the second part of that promise was never upheld. And in large part, it was never upheld. The real peace was never delivered because of the continued prejudice held out against the Bosnian Muslim people. We even today hear stories about Mujahideen and Al-Qaeda being in Bosnia, which frankly is all part of a propaganda campaign to try to minimize the role of Muslims as a whole in Europe. And we, of course, are indigenous to that region. So we, the Bosnian and Herzegovinian people, Muslims, Serbs, Croats, Jews, and others, did not want and did not expect this type of peace to be delivered by those who were there, if I can use the word, sponsoring the Dayton Accords. We expected to be part of the European Union, a member of NATO already, and not outside looking in because of the indifference by the West and the crimes committed by people like Ratko Mladic and his sponsors in Belgrade.
But membership into the EU is a very long process. I mean, Croatia that process began 6 years ago, and there are many other issues that need to be dealt with for a full EU membership. So, can you accept that perhaps this is going to take time, and it isn't just some of the things that you've said, prejudice perhaps, or any of those things?
That's an absolutely valid point. The issue that I'm making is, number one, Bosnia and Herzegovina basically has two legs on right now. It's called two entities. One is a Serb entity. The other one is really what I call the rest of the country, which is free. And in order to walk or run into the EU, it needs both legs walking or running. And unfortunately, one leg, every time the other starts to move forward, is kicking it in the butt. And it is because of continued influence of Serbian nationalists, including those from Belgrade, that Bosnia is held back. And Europe and the United States not only do not confront that Serbian nationalism that comes from Belgrade and from even within Bosnia, but in effect they have empowered it. And because they legitimized Ratko Mladic's actions in Dayton 16 years ago, it is time that they also confront it. And I think Mr. Faisal is making a great point. Ratko Mladic is the symbol, but he's not just a symbol of the common peasant nationalist. He's the symbol of a much greater project that to this day persists. And that project needs to be moved from the whole region. And part of Serbia's entry into the European Union needs to be an embrace of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a multi-ethnic, pluralistic state, integrated, and also rejection of its own ultra-nationalist tendencies.
All right, let's try and broaden this out a little bit more now. The Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia is just one arm of international justice, of course. The ICC, or the International Criminal Court, is another. Let's look at some of the work this court does and the leaders it is trying to bring to justice. The ICC's chief prosecutor, Luis Moreno Ocampo, has asked for Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi to be arrested. Never before has the ICC worked so quickly. Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has been wanted for over 2 years on charges of genocide and crimes against humanity in Darfur. But Sudan refuses to give him up. Charles Taylor was the president of Liberia until 2003. He was indicted while still in office for crimes against humanity in Liberia and Sierra Leone, and more than 250,000 people were killed. Taylor's trial is ongoing. And what about Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad and Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh? They are believed to have ordered security and armed forces to shoot at unarmed demonstrators. The crackdowns haven't stopped, so could the threat of punishment deter them? Faisal Dawji, if I could turn to you on that, do you think that this increased activity on the international front with some of what we heard as far as going after some of these leaders, will that be a deterrent for any future crackdowns, violent crackdowns that we perhaps might see in the future?
Well, I hope that it will spur the International Criminal Court to go after these dictators and war criminals. However, after looking at what happened during the illegal invasion of Iraq, one finds that Bush and Blair are free to do as they please. So I think there's a selective morality on the part of the international community on who it goes after and who it frees. And I think if you look at what has happened in the last month, the assassination of Osama bin Laden and the arrest of Ratko Mladic, you know, it seems as if the ICC has a mandate to go after individuals. However, countries take it upon themselves then to violate international law and implement justice as they see it. Now, if we are talking about a fair and just international system, why shouldn't we include George Bush, Blair, and all the other warmongering neocons who drummed up support for an illegal invasion that has killed more than 1 million people and has wreaked havoc in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan? So I think one hopes that the international community and the Hague and the ICC is fair in its dealing with individuals. However, for victims, they would look at it very skeptically, especially those in Iraq and also those in Bosnia.
Mohammed Shakirbi in New York, if I could turn to you for the last word on this. How do you see this playing out? Are you confident that justice will be done in the end?
I was actually one of the signatories of the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute, in 1998, and the court, I think, has moved further than most of us would have anticipated, and we say this with great satisfaction. The first hurdle you have to overcome is whether or not justice and peace are in conflict, and I don't think so. Most people somehow hold the view, at least back then, that by indicting people like Gaddafi, you are impairing the prospect of justice to make deals. In fact, it is these very deals that allow people like Gaddafi, or for that matter Assad, to perpetuate their hold on power. I also think it's important that we have a permanent institution like the International Criminal Court, which is less dependent on the big powers. The United States, Russia, and China are actually not members of the International Criminal Court. Neither are Pakistan, India, or Israel, just to mention.
All right, that is going to have to be the last word. We are unfortunately out of time on the discussion, but I want to thank both of you for taking part in the discussion. Faisal Dawji in Durban and Mohammed Shakirbi in New York. Many thanks for your time. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. You can email them to us anytime at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.